China's EV sales have unquestionably reached a tipping point. That's even confirmed by analysts from Bloomberg, who also say that this is the beginning of the end for sales of gasoline in China. And it will mean increased prices at the petrol pump, or the gas pump as you may say in America, within the next year. You can expect a rise in the cost of fuel. Why is that? Well, there's a few reasons. Hello my friends, welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans, you're watching the Electric Viking. Great to have you with us. Right now, gasoline, petrol, it's fairly cheap, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people say it's expensive, but it's still relatively cheap. If you look at the cost of what it was 20 years ago, it's actually not too bad. That's about to change though. Keep in mind, when petrol stations begin closing, it becomes more expensive to sell one product. It's simply a reality. Moore's law. When a product is doubled in its manufacturing numbers, the cost declines by 20%. So if you halve the amount of fuel being sold, and all these gas stations, petrol stations, if half of them turn into EV stations, it means there's more distance between those stations and it becomes more expensive to continue running the entire global petrol gasoline network. That's simply a reality. Moore's law is always true. It's never not. So Bloomberg is saying that the tipping point in China signals the demise of gasoline. Interestingly, I received an email today from someone predicting a very similar thing for various reasons. He believes that fossil fuel companies, including Shell and BP, some of the biggest in the world, will actually pivot very quickly within the next few years into trying to sell electricity because they realize that this is happening based on the numbers. Now, it's true, oil companies, they are less emotional, they are more logical, and they simply want to make the largest profit they can. And that's why a lot of oil companies are already building some of the biggest batteries in the world in order to take over electrical grids. Essentially, they know that they can now deploy enormous Tesla-like batteries in order to make billions of dollars in profits from you, buying electricity from them from your house or from an EV charger. From Tesla chargers in the ancient alleys that surround the Forbidden City in Beijing to lonely highway rest stops with charging posts in the western deserts, signs of the electrification of China's transport fleet and the demise of gasoline are everywhere, says Automotive News China. Now, according to official statistics, China's sales of EVs and plug-in hybrids have reached a tipping point. They hit 56% last month. They've accounted for more than half of retail passenger vehicle sales in the 4 months from July, according to the China Passenger Car Association, a trend that's poised to send appetite for transport fuels into a decline that will have a major impact on the global oil market. Experts have also predicted, they've also said that China has hit peak oil. Peak oil has been and gone. Now, I believe that's exceptionally logical. If you think about it, the majority of the oil demand in China comes from its enormous vehicle fleet. With more than 1.35 billion people, most of them now owning vehicles. They didn't used to, but most of them now do. It means that the more of them that buy EVs, as we can see now, if 56% of them are buying an EV, that demand will drastically reduce. Now, that number we're looking at is today, right? 56%. But where will that be in 12 months' time? Many experts believe in 12 months' time it'll be 70 to 80%, and that within 2 years it will hit 100%. The more rapid than expected uptake of EVs has shifted views among oil forecasters at energy majors, banks, and academics in recent months. This is where things are really getting interesting. Unlike in the US and Europe, where peaks in consumption were followed by long plateaus, the drop in demand in the world's top crude oil importer is expected to be pronounced. In fact, it's expected to be here to stay. Brokerage CITIC Futures Company sees Chinese gasoline consumption dropping by 5% every single year until 2030 and beyond. 5% every year. They're saying it is unquestionably true that China has hit peak oil. The future is coming faster in China, said Siren Healy, an oil analyst at the International Energy Agency in Paris. What we're seeing now is the medium-term expectations coming ahead of schedule. And that has implications for the shape of Chinese and global demand growth through the remainder of the decade. For a global oil market, which has come to rely on China as its main growth driver for most of this century, that will erode a major pillar of consumption. The country accounts for around a fifth of worldwide oil demand, 20%, and gasoline makes up around a quarter of that. The prospect of a sharp drop from transport is also coming on top of tepid industrial consumption due to slowing economic growth. The growing popularity of electric trucks and buses, as well as those that run on liquefied natural gas, is weighing on demand for diesel as well. So crude oil, a significant percentage of that product, actually ends up not being gasoline, it ends up being diesel. And diesel is declining drastically in popularity. The Chinese government hates diesel. They don't want you to buy diesel. Now, in many cities in China, the states are planning to try to eradicate diesel, because diesel, they realize, is responsible for the worst pollution, for the worst types of cancer. China's consumption of the fuel peaked in 2019 and will drop by 3% to 5% every year through 2030, until eventually it's gone. There are still a lot of unknowns about how China's uptake of EVs will play out, says Automotive China. Now, I don't believe that. I don't believe that's true. I think it's well and truly finished. But one question is whether full electrification can ever be achieved and what that will mean for fuel demand. Another question mark surrounds plug-in hybrid vehicles, which can be powered by electricity or backed up by gasoline engines. They've accounted for much of the sales growth of the past few years. But there's little data on the extent to which the drivers of these cars still rely on actual gasoline. Now you can imagine, electricity is much cheaper in China than gasoline. So even if you do own a plug-in hybrid, you sure as hell don't want to be powering it by the more expensive kind of fuel. The IEA sees rampant mass market electrification pushing Chinese gasoline demand into decline from this year onwards, 2025 onwards. That will result in an average annual drop of over 2% from 2023 through to 2030. Others see a more rapid retreat. Investment banks believe this will happen incredibly quickly. Improvements in fuel efficiency and a peak in car ownership would help drive the declines, along with the uptake of electric vehicles, electric trucks, and electric buses, say brokerage firms in a note in late October. This year may be a turning point for China's refined oil market, with gasoline consumption peaking before declining rapidly, said Lu Yantou, a senior engineer with the PetroChina Planning and Engineering Institute, part of China's biggest oil company, who wrote this month an analysis piece on PetroChina's website. Basically, PetroChina itself is predicting an enormous decline in consumption. The amount of gasoline-powered cars on the road would peak as early as next year, she said, and fall every year after that, until eventually there are no more of them. Beijing planted the seeds for the transition to EVs more than a decade ago, offering subsidies that gave automakers time to scale up output and lower costs. Automotive News China says that this began to pay off in 2021 when output of new energy vehicle shipments tripled from the previous year. They're now primed to surpass the 11 million mark for the first time in 2024. New energy vehicles, meaning fully electric cars and plug-in hybrids, are accounting for 10% of all vehicles on the road in China. But that's expected to exceed 20% by 2027 and 100% by the late 2030s. Said Anders Hove, a China researcher at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. The country's oil demand from light vehicles will fall from around 3.5 million barrels a day at the moment to 1 million by 2040, he said. Now you can imagine when only, say, 10 to 5% of all cars are powered by gasoline in China, Imagine how incredibly expensive it will be. It will be insane. You'll have to be looking around. Where do I get petrol from today? Where do I get gas from today? Oh, there's one station here, but it's 200 kilometers away. I'm going to have to drive 120 miles to get there. That's the kind of situation people will face. Now, this transition will happen much faster, I believe, than experts were predicting for that obvious logical reason. Gas stations can't make a profit if they're only selling to a tiny market. That market will shrink very, very quickly. Now remember that China is adding the equivalent to 5 nuclear power stations every week in solar output. I mean, the amount of solar farms China is building, wind farms China is building, enormous batteries that China is deploying is truly, truly staggering. China's path towards electrification is faster than in other economies. In the US, EVs still represent only about 10% of total car sales. Gasoline consumption there has fallen just 12% from a peak in 2004 through last year, according to IEA data. In Europe, where cars are running on gasoline and diesel is more common, transport sector consumption is down only 6% from its high in 2007. China's likely drop in gasoline demand due to its aggressive electric car rollout is completely unique in some respects, said the IEA. I don't think there's a country that has the comparable profile. But considering China is the world's growth engine, China makes the best vehicles today, and 1 in 3 vehicles sold worldwide every day is sold in China, the implications of China's rapid transformation from gasoline to EVs will have profound implications on the entire global economy. Thanks for watching.